Hello Year 11s and welcome to this, the first video in our series of 2 videos in which we look at civil remedies. There are 2 types of civil remedies that we will be discussing. The first type of civil remedies is damages, and that is what this video is about. The second type of civil remedies is injunctions, and that is what the next video is about. There are 4 things that you need to do while you're watching this video. The first thing is to take the very best Cornell notes that you can. The second thing is to use the pause and rewind functions. Use the pause function if you need to stop this video to take notes. Use the rewind function if you need to go back over any information contained in this video. The third thing that you need to do is have your vocabulary sheet open in front of you so that you can write into your vocabulary sheet the definitions of key terms or of any other words that you may be unfamiliar with. And the fourth thing that you need to do is have your summary books open in front of you. In this video, I will give you some guidance as to what you should write in your summary books. Once you've finished watching this video, please read the relevant pages from the textbook referred to on this slide. And if you find any additional information from that reading that you think is useful, then supplement your Cornell notes with that information. Well, let's get started then. There are 2 learning intentions for this video. Make sure that you write these down in your Cornell notes. The first learning intention is that you need to be able to describe damages and their purposes. The second learning intention is that you need to be able to discuss the ability of damages to achieve their purposes. The information contained in this video will help you achieve these learning intentions, and we'll be doing some activities in class which will also help you to achieve these learning intentions. As I've said, damages and injunctions are both types of civil remedies. Civil remedies are sometimes just referred to as remedies. A remedy is an order that is made by a court to resolve a civil dispute. In other words, remedy is a term that is only used in the civil law, not in the criminal law. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term remedy and write this definition in there. Once you've done that, highlight the words in red, bold, italicized type, and if you're ever asked to define remedy or civil remedy, make sure that you include the highlighted words in your definition. The remedy that a plaintiff asks a court to award when the plaintiff sues a defendant is set out in the plaintiff's statement of claim. A statement of claim is a document that the plaintiff serves on the defendant when the plaintiff is suing the defendant for a civil wrong. This document sets out the details of the plaintiff's claim against the defendant. The focus of our 2 videos on civil remedies is on the purposes of the civil remedies of damages and injunctions. On this slide, I have included a table that sets out the overarching purpose of civil remedies. This purpose is to restore, as far as possible, the plaintiff, that is, the party whose rights have been infringed, to their original position, that is, the position the plaintiff was in before the wrong occurred, that is, before the plaintiff's rights were infringed. Copy this table into your summary books. In this video and the next video, I will show you how both damages and injunctions achieve this overarching purpose of civil remedies. The focus of this video is on damages. As you can see, there are different types of damages. Each of these types of damages has a particular purpose, and for the most common types of damages, that is, specific damages, general damages, and aggravated damages, their particular purposes align with the overarching purpose of civil remedies, which is to restore the plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. On this slide, I've set out a table that you must include in your summary books. On the left-hand side of this table, I have listed the different types of damages. As we go through this video, you will need to complete the two right-hand columns of this table by summarizing the particular purposes of each of these different types of damages and the extent to which each of specific damages, general damages, and aggravated damages achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies. Damages are an amount of money that a court orders a defendant to pay a plaintiff because of the civil wrong that the defendant has committed against the plaintiff. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term damages and write this definition in there. Now, you need to be very careful not to confuse the concept of damages, which is an amount of money, with the concept of damage, which is loss. To give you an example, where a defendant negligently drives their car into a plaintiff and breaks the plaintiff's legs, then the damage that the plaintiff suffers is broken legs. However, as a result of negligently breaking the plaintiff's legs, a court may order the defendant to pay some money to the plaintiff by way of compensation for the plaintiff's broken legs. This amount of money is called damages. Don't confuse the two concepts. As I've said, there are different types of damages, and we're going to look at these different types in the next few slides. The first type of damages is compensatory damages. Compensatory damages is actually an umbrella term that covers three types of damages, namely specific damages, general damages, and aggravated damages. Compensatory damages are damages that compensate the plaintiff with money for losses that the plaintiff has suffered. The purpose of compensatory damages is therefore to restore, as far as possible, the plaintiff to their original position by compensating the plaintiff with money for losses that the plaintiff has suffered. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term compensatory damages and write this definition in there. Then write the purpose of compensatory damages in the middle column of your summary book table. You can see how compensatory damages achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies. Their purpose is to restore the plaintiff as far as possible to their original position by providing the plaintiff with money to compensate the plaintiff for the losses that the plaintiff has suffered. Now, in a SAC or exam question where you are asked to describe or discuss different types of damages, do not describe or discuss compensatory damages. This is just an umbrella term for specific, general, and aggravated damages. Instead, where a SAC or exam question asks you to describe or discuss different types of damages, you must describe or discuss specific, general, and or aggravated damages as opposed to merely compensatory damages. However, you need to know what compensatory damages are because sometimes a SAC or exam question will ask you to, for example, discuss the extent to which compensatory damages achieve the purposes of civil remedies. In answering this question, you will need to discuss the extent to which specific, general, and or aggravated damages achieve the purpose of restoring a plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. Now, let's look at each of the three kinds of compensatory damages, that is, specific damages, general damages, and aggravated damages in turn, together with their particular purposes. I'll also show you how these three different types of damages achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies, which is to restore a plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. Specific damages are damages that compensate the plaintiff for losses that can be given a precise monetary value. These losses can often be given a precise monetary value because they are financial losses that have already occurred, and so the exact amount of those losses is known. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheet, find the term specific damages and write this definition in there. The purpose of specific damages is therefore to compensate the plaintiff for losses that can be given a precise monetary value. Write this purpose in the middle column of your summary book table. Let me give you an example. Let's go back to the case of the plaintiff whose legs were broken because of the defendant's negligent driving. It may be that the plaintiff was employed as a casual worker at McDonald's who worked 2 shifts per week. Because the plaintiff cannot work while his legs are healing, the plaintiff will have lost 2 shifts worth of work per week. This loss can be given a precise monetary value because we know what the plaintiff would have been paid if the defendant's negligence hadn't prevented the plaintiff from working his shifts. Similarly, the plaintiff will have had to pay a doctor to examine and look after his legs. Again, this loss can be given a precise monetary value because the plaintiff will have received a bill from the doctor. A word of warning, you must be very careful with your language. We say that specific damages compensate the plaintiff for their loss. In this case, their loss of wages and their medical expenses. The specific damages are not the loss itself. That is, the specific damages are not the loss of wages and the medical expenses. Instead, the specific damages are compensation for these losses. In addition, it is the losses, not the specific damages, that can be precisely calculated in monetary terms. Now, remember that the overarching purpose of civil remedies is to return the plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. Well, specific damages achieve this purpose perfectly. That is because they provide dollar-for-dollar compensation for losses that can be given a precise monetary value. That is, they replace money with money. If the plaintiff has lost wages worth $2,000, then the plaintiff will be given specific damages of $2,000. If the plaintiff has paid $5,000 in medical expenses, then the plaintiff will be given specific damages of $5,000. So, where a loss is covered by specific damages, those damages perfectly restore the plaintiff to their original financial position. Summarize what I've just said about the extent to which specific damages achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies in the right-hand column of your summary book table. Because specific damages perfectly compensate a plaintiff for losses that can be given a precise monetary value, there are no limitations on the ability of specific damages to achieve this overarching purpose in relation to these types of losses. Note that it is not correct to say that a limitation on specific damages is that they do not compensate a plaintiff for losses that cannot be given a precise monetary value, such as loss of enjoyment of life. This is not a valid point because it is not the purpose of specific damages to compensate a plaintiff for these types of losses in the first place. As you'll see, these kinds of losses are compensated for by general and aggravated damages. The second type of compensatory damages are general damages. General damages are damages that compensate the plaintiff for losses that cannot be given a precise monetary value, either because the losses occur in the future or because the losses cannot be calculated in monetary terms. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term general damages and write this definition in there. The purpose of general damages is therefore to compensate the plaintiff for losses that cannot be given a precise monetary value, either because the losses occur in the future or because the losses cannot be calculated in monetary terms. Write this purpose in the middle column of your summary book table. Let me give an example. Again, we'll go back to the case of the plaintiff whose legs were broken by the defendant's negligent driving. Let's suppose that the plaintiff was a promising rugby player who was training with Melbourne Storm. Let's also suppose that, because of his broken legs, the plaintiff will no longer be able to play rugby, perhaps because the bones haven't reset properly. In such a case, the plaintiff has clearly suffered loss. He has lost the opportunity to earn money by playing professional rugby. That is, the plaintiff has suffered a loss of future earning capacity and of future employment prospects. However, we don't know exactly how much money the plaintiff has lost through not being able to play professional rugby. This is because this loss of income occurs in the future, so we can only estimate what that loss is likely to be. And that estimate will have to be based on assumptions, such as assumptions about the plaintiff's rugby playing skills, the pay that the plaintiff would have received as a rugby player, and the length of time for which the plaintiff would have played rugby. It is unlikely that these assumptions will be correct, but we will never know because they are just guesses about what would have happened in the future. So we know that the plaintiff has suffered a loss, but we cannot give that loss a precise monetary value. Let's further suppose that the plaintiff's legs are so badly damaged that they have to be amputated. Not only has the plaintiff lost his legs, but he might suffer from continual pain, that is, the phantom pains that amputees often suffer. In addition, the plaintiff is probably unable to enjoy the same quality of life that he had before the accident. Without his legs, he might be confined to a wheelchair and is unable to walk, run, or swim. In such a case, the plaintiff has clearly suffered loss. He has lost his legs, he has ongoing pain, and his quality of life has been reduced. However, we cannot really calculate these losses in monetary terms. Again, you must be very careful with your language. We say that general damages compensate the plaintiff for their loss. In this case, for their pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, and loss of limbs. The general damages are not the loss itself. That is, the general damages are not the pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, and loss of limbs. Instead, the general damages are compensation for these losses. In addition, it is the losses, not the general damages, that cannot be precisely calculated in monetary terms. Now remember that the overarching purpose of civil remedies is to return the plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. Well, general damages cannot perfectly restore the plaintiff to their original position. Where the loss cannot be given a precise monetary value because it occurs in the future and so the amount of that loss can only be estimated, then it is unlikely that the amount of general damages that the defendant must pay the plaintiff will match the actual loss that has occurred. In the case of our promising rugby player, we know that the accident has reduced their future earning capacity, but because the estimated amount of that reduction in future earning capacity is based on assumptions that might be wrong, that is, guesses about the future, it is highly likely that the general damages that are paid to the plaintiff for this loss will either be too much, that is, will overcompensate the plaintiff for this loss, or too little, that is, will undercompensate the plaintiff for this loss. In addition, where the loss cannot be given a precise monetary value because it cannot be calculated in monetary terms, then money cannot really restore the plaintiff to their original position. Money does not take away a plaintiff's pain and suffering. Money does not give back to a plaintiff the quality of life that they enjoyed before the defendant committed the wrong against the plaintiff and infringed the plaintiff's rights. And money does not restore a plaintiff's amputated limbs. However, the best that we can do for the plaintiff in the circumstances is to give the plaintiff money. This highlights the significance of the words "as far as possible." Money cannot return our promising rugby player to their original position before the accident by wiping out the losses that have occurred. Instead, money, general damages, can only alleviate these losses. This is the best we can do for the plaintiff in trying to restore the plaintiff to their original position. Summarize what I've just said about the extent to which damages achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies in the right-hand column of your summary book table. The reference to extent means that you have to explain how general damages do achieve this overarching purpose of civil remedies, as well as the limitations on the ability of general damages to achieve this overarching purpose. The third kind of compensatory damages is aggravated damages. Aggravated damages are damages that compensate the plaintiff for humiliation and insult. For example, for damage to reputation. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheet, find the term aggravated damages and write this definition in there. The purpose of aggravated damages is therefore to compensate the plaintiff for humiliation and insult. Write this purpose in the middle column of your summary book table. This kind of damages is commonly associated with defamation cases, where the plaintiff sues the defendant for damaging the plaintiff's reputation. For example, some time ago, the pitch-perfect actress Rebel Wilson sued the gossip magazine Woman's Day for publishing articles that called Rebel Wilson a liar. These articles caused Rebel Wilson to feel humiliated and insulted, and Woman's Day was ordered to pay Rebel Wilson aggravated damages to compensate her for this loss. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, I repeat that you must be very careful with your language. We say that aggravated damages compensate the plaintiff for their loss. In this case, for the humiliation, insult, and reputational damage that the plaintiff has suffered. The aggravated damages are not the loss itself. That is, the aggravated damages are not the humiliation, insult, and damaged reputation. Instead, the aggravated damages are compensation for these losses. Again, remember that the overarching purpose of civil remedies is to return the plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. Well, aggravated damages cannot perfectly restore the plaintiff to their original position. This is because humiliation, insult, and reputation cannot be measured in monetary terms. Money does not take away the humiliation and insult that a plaintiff has suffered, and money does not restore a plaintiff's reputation. However, the best that we can do for the plaintiff in the circumstances is to give the plaintiff money. Again, this highlights the significance of the words "as far as possible." Money cannot return a plaintiff to their original position by wiping out the humiliation, insult, and reputational damage that a plaintiff has suffered. Instead, money, aggravated damages, can only alleviate these losses. This is the best we can do for the plaintiff in trying to restore the plaintiff to their original position. Summarize what I've just said about the extent to which aggravated damages achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies in the right-hand column of your summary book table. The reference to extent means that you have to explain how aggravated damages do achieve this overarching purpose of civil remedies, as well as the limitations on the ability of aggravated damages to achieve this overarching purpose. Having looked at specific, general, and aggravated damages, that is, the three kinds of compensatory damages, we can now move on to look at three other types of damages. Now, these three other types of damages are not compensatory damages. Their purpose is not to compensate the plaintiff for losses that the plaintiff has suffered. Instead, as you'll see, they have quite different purposes. The consequence of this is that they do not and are not intended to achieve the overarching purpose of civil remedies, which is to return the plaintiff as far as possible to their original position. I emphasize this because if a SAC or exam question asks you to describe or discuss compensatory damages, then you must not describe or discuss these next three types of damages. In addition, if a SAC or exam question asks you to discuss the extent to which damages can restore a plaintiff to their original position, then you need to remember that these next three types of damages do not restore a plaintiff to their original position at all. That is not their purpose. The first of these types of damages is nominal damages. Nominal damages are a small amount of damages that is awarded where the defendant has infringed the plaintiff's rights, but either the plaintiff has not suffered any significant loss or the plaintiff is not seeking substantial damages. The purpose of nominal damages is to uphold a plaintiff's rights without awarding a substantial amount of damages. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term nominal damages and write this definition in there. Then write the purpose of nominal damages in the middle column of your summary book table. An example of where a plaintiff has not suffered any significant loss is where the defendant defames the plaintiff, but the plaintiff's reputation is already so bad that there is no real damage to the plaintiff's reputation. This would be the case where a newspaper reports that a serial killer knocked an old lady over in the street, when in fact the serial killer had done no such thing. While the newspaper would be liable to the serial killer for defamation, that is, for falsely reporting that the serial killer had knocked over an old lady, the serial killer already has a reputation for killing people, and so the newspaper report is hardly going to make the serial killer's reputation any worse. In this situation, if the serial killer sued the newspaper for defamation, nominal damages, that means, say, an amount of $1, would be awarded to the serial killer because, while the newspaper has infringed the serial killer's rights by defaming the serial killer has not suffered any significant loss. The serial killer's reputation has not been significantly damaged. An example of where a plaintiff did not seek substantial damages is when Taylor Swift sued a DJ for sexual assault. In that case, the DJ clearly infringed Taylor Swift's rights by inappropriately touching her. However, Taylor Swift only sued the DJ for $1 because she wasn't after compensation for herself. Instead, she wanted to make a point. That is, that men, and particularly men in positions of power, are not entitled to sexually harass women without suffering any consequences. Next, we have contemptuous damages. Contemptuous damages are a small amount of damages that are awarded where the plaintiff has the legal right to damages but does not deserve them. The purpose of contemptuous damages is to demonstrate the court's contempt for, that is, the court's disapproval of, the plaintiff's claim. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term contemptuous damages and write this definition in there. Then write the purpose of contemptuous damages in the middle column of your summary book table. An example of where contemptuous damages might be awarded is where the plaintiff starts a fight with the defendant by provoking the defendant, for instance by calling the defendant obscene names. The defendant then hits the plaintiff, breaking the plaintiff's nose, and the plaintiff sues the defendant for trespass. In such a case, the plaintiff has the legal right to damages because the defendant has infringed the plaintiff's rights by physically injuring the plaintiff. However, a court is likely to take the view that the plaintiff does not really deserve any damages because it was the plaintiff who started the fight in the first place. This would be a situation where the court is likely to order the defendant to pay contemptuous damages to the plaintiff of, say, $1. Finally, we have exemplary damages. Exemplary damages, sometimes called punitive damages, are damages that the defendant is required to pay the plaintiff as a punishment. For example, as where the defendant has been extremely negligent, malicious, or violent, and the court wishes to show its disapproval of the defendant's conduct. The purpose of exemplary damages is to punish the defendant for an extreme infringement of the plaintiff's rights and to deter the defendant and others from behaving that way in the future. Look down the left-hand side of your vocabulary sheets, find the term exemplary or punitive damages and write this definition in there. Then write the purpose of exemplary damages down in the middle column of your summary book table. An example of where exemplary damages might be awarded is where the defendant injures the plaintiff in a car accident which was caused by the defendant driving at very high speed in very wet conditions on a very dark night. If the plaintiff sues the defendant, then, in addition to being required to pay the plaintiff compensatory damages to compensate the plaintiff for the plaintiff's injuries, the court might also order the defendant to pay the plaintiff an amount of exemplary damages because the defendant was driving in an extremely negligent way. Exemplary damages are very different from compensatory damages because these damages are on top of the compensatory damages that compensate the plaintiff for their losses. That is, exemplary damages are not intended to compensate the plaintiff. Instead, as I've said, the purpose of exemplary damages is to punish the defendant, not compensate the plaintiff, and to deter both the defendant and others from behaving in a similar way in the future. Note that exemplary damages are not a fine. A fine is a criminal sanction where an accused is required to pay money to the government. However, exemplary damages are a civil remedy where the money, that is the damages, are paid to the plaintiff. In addition, exemplary damages are very different from nominal and contemptuous damages. While nominal and contemptuous damages are small amounts of damages, say $1, exemplary damages can be a very large amount of damages. The more a court wishes to show its disapproval of the defendant's conduct, the larger will be the amount of exemplary damages that the court orders the defendant to pay to the plaintiff. So far, we've looked at the purposes of damages. Our second learning intention requires you to be able to discuss the ability of damages to achieve their purposes. On this slide, I've set out a table which describes the strengths and weaknesses of compensatory damages, that is, specific, general, and aggravated damages, in achieving the purpose of restoring, as far as possible, the plaintiff to their original position. You could use this table to assist you to answer a question which requires you to discuss the extent to which compensatory damages achieve their purposes. Because this is a discussion, when you're contrasting strengths against weaknesses, you will be using words such as however, on the other hand, in contrast, while, and whereas. Now, I've numbered the items in this table in the order that I would refer to them if I was to answer such a question. Please include this table in your summary books, together with any other notes on the table that you need to understand it. Starting off with specific damages are able to perfectly compensate a plaintiff for quantifiable financial losses that the plaintiff has suffered, such as lost wages and medical expenses. This is because specific damages provide dollar-for-dollar compensation for losses that can be given a precise monetary value. That is, they replace money with money. On the other hand, money cannot perfectly compensate a plaintiff for losses that cannot be given a precise monetary value. This may be because the loss cannot be calculated in monetary terms. This is the case where the loss is pain and suffering, loss of enjoyment of life, loss of a limb, or humiliation or insult. Or it may be because the amount of the losses can only be estimated as they occur in the future. This is the case where the loss is a loss of future earning capacity or of employment prospects. These losses are covered by general damages and, in the case of humiliation or insult, by aggravated damages. In other words, general damages and aggravated damages cannot perfectly compensate a plaintiff for these types of losses. However, they can go some way to alleviating, that is, easing, the plaintiff's losses. After all, money is better than nothing, and the payment of money to the plaintiff for these types of losses is the best that can be done in the circumstances to try to restore the plaintiff to their original position. Having said this, damages do not compensate the plaintiff for the time, inconvenience, and stress of having to go to court to enforce their rights. It takes time to prepare a case for court and for the court to hear a case. This can also disrupt the plaintiff's life, as the plaintiff will have to spend time helping their lawyers to prepare the case and sitting in court during the trial, rather than doing other things such as working in their job. And court proceedings are stressful, particularly where the plaintiff is being cross-examined by the defendant, as the purpose of cross-examination is to attack the plaintiff's evidence. In addition, and perhaps most importantly, damages will not compensate the plaintiff for their losses if the defendant is unable to pay them. In such a case, the plaintiff goes uncompensated, and that's because the source of the plaintiff's compensation is the defendant. It therefore makes no sense for a plaintiff to go to the cost, time, and stress of suing a defendant for damages where, if the plaintiff wins, the defendant hasn't got any money to pay the damages that are awarded to the plaintiff. There are two other weaknesses of compensatory damages that reduce their ability to restore the plaintiff to their original position. First, there may be some cases in which, instead of being paid money, that is, instead of being paid damages, a plaintiff would be better off with an injunction, that is, with a court order that requires the defendant to do something or that prohibits the defendant from doing something. We'll look at injunctions in more detail in the next video. However, take the case of a plaintiff whose neighbour wants to raise chickens. The plaintiff does not want the neighbour to do this because the smell and noise of the chickens will seriously affect the ability of the plaintiff to enjoy living in their house. The plaintiff does not really want money to compensate them for the smell and noise of the chickens. What the plaintiff wants is to stop that smell and noise in the first place. In these circumstances, an injunction that prohibits the neighbour from raising chickens next door will be a better remedy for the plaintiff than damages. And second, in some cases there may be a statutory cap, that is, a cap imposed by an Act of Parliament on the amount of damages that can be awarded to a plaintiff. For example, in Victoria, damages for non-economic loss in defamation cases are capped at $443,000. Damages for non-economic loss largely refer to aggravated damages, that is, damages for damage to reputation. In other words, it doesn't matter if the actual loss, that is, the actual damage to reputation that a plaintiff has suffered because of a defendant's defamation, is more than $443,000. The maximum amount of compensation that can be awarded to the plaintiff for this type of loss is $443,000. Where a statutory cap applies, then damages will not compensate the plaintiff for losses above this cap. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. As a result of watching and taking notes on this video, you should now be able to do two things. The first thing is to describe damages and their purposes. The second thing is to discuss the ability of damages to achieve their purposes. We'll be doing some learning activities in class which will consolidate your ability to achieve these learning intentions. Please remember to read the relevant pages from the textbook referred to on the first slide in this video. If you find any additional information that you think is useful, then supplement your Cornell notes with that additional information. Thank you for your attention.